All right, we've got Keisha Reefer here with the Urban Sentinel, and I know that Reginald will hopefully be joining us very shortly and all, but we've also got a very special guest. So as the producer, I'm going to bring on Sir Richard, and then Keisha and Sir Richard will get into a very deep and enriching conversation and all along those lines. And hopefully later on, Reginald will get a chance to join us. But right now, I'm going to turn it over to Keisha, and definitely she has some very interesting questions and some interesting conversation coming our way with Sir Richard. So, Keisha, I'm turning it over.
Yes. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Keisha Reefer Esprit, and I am the guest host of the Urban Sentinel TV live show. To be featured is one of the Caribbean's most sought after attorneys, Sir Richard Cheltenham, who has lived through Barbados, prior independence, during independence, and after becoming a republic. This esteemed profession is in good hands with one of our prolific sons of the soil. It is necessary to give a person their flowers while alive. I count it a privilege to interview one of the country's most decorated and successful attorneys who is resolute in yeoman service to his country. Sir Cheltenham, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well and happy to be with you.
Yes, thank you. Well, we're going to get started. And the first question I have for you is, what inspired you to take the legal path?
Well, I should go back to my early days growing up in the rural district of St. Patrick's, about 9 miles away from Bridgetown. We were surrounded by cane fields, plantations, and cane factories. And I was fortunate to have access on a daily basis to the Advocate newspaper. That was our one daily newspaper at that time. And I was fortunate too to have access to the Recorder. It was such a newspaper that was published twice a week. And whenever it came out, and this third organ was less consistent, the Beacon paper, which was the paper of the Barbados Labour Party. So through those multiple organs, I was able to keep abreast of the work of Grantley Adams, later Sir Grantley, and one of our first national heroes, in fighting for the downtrodden, fighting to uplift them, their conditions, their pay, compensation for the work they do, and much more. Because Grantley Adams, was not only head of the Barbados Labour Party, but he was head of the Barbados Workers' Union. So apart from trying to bring about political changes, he was always fighting for the improvement of working conditions of laborers, artisans, and many other classes of workers. And I was impressed with his work, and I also was impressed with the work of Norman Manley, a national hero of Jamaica, but he was an outstanding lawyer, an advocate, and he took part in the national life of the country after the disturbances that impacted this area in 1937 period.
Okay.
So I was impressed with them and wanted to follow in their footsteps and make my contribution to national life, both at the level of law and also the level of politics.
Thank you. And you have done an impeccable job. You're extraordinary.
Well,
My
that's very
second,
generous of you, Keisha.
yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Second question, do you remember your first legal case victory?
Yes, it happened shortly after I was called to the bar. I was called in early December of 1970.
Okay,
So effectively, I started work in early 1971, January.
okay,
And a young man came to me and gave a story of working on a ship that had come into port. And he left the key to his cabin, if I may put it that way, in a public place on the ship. I suppose it was it indicated to me that you shouldn't walk with your key, but you should leave it on the ship in a particular
mm,
area, which was a public area. And
okay,
when he got back, um, or while he was away, I think that some marijuana um, was found in his cabin, and he was charged. And he was convicted at the magistrate court level, and the case was taken to the divisional court, which was the name of the court of appeal, hearing
okay,
cases that were determined then by the magistrate. We no
okay,
longer have a divisional court. But my chamber master, Bernard St. John, who
yes,
himself became a prime minister later, following Tom Adams. He served for 9 months or so before his party and he too were defeated at the polls. But he led me in the appeal, and
okay,
the court upheld our submissions and overturned the conviction. And it's not difficult to see why, because to the extent that he was obliged to leave his key in a public place, um, anybody could have taken that key and entered his room. So that
yes,
the court had no difficulty in reversing the magistrate's decision. Unfortunate for me, that case is reported in the West Indian Reports, Volume 18.
okay,
There's a series called the West Indian Reports that started in the late 50s and continues to this day. And Volume 18 contains that case. Um, so that the first case that I had turned out to have reached the reports. That was very
okay,
fortunate indeed for me.
yes, okay, okay. What was your most memorable case?
The most memorable case is perhaps what is widely known in Barbados as the 8% case. You
Okay,
remember that when Erskine Sandyford was Prime Minister, and by the way, he died yesterday,
yes,
um, the country was experiencing economic difficulties, and the salary of public servants was reduced by 8%. And I took up the case on behalf of a lady who challenged the government, Ophelia King. And we lost the case at the High Court. The Court of Appeal, in a 2-1 decision, um, ruled against us. And the one man who wrote the minority decision, Clifford Husbands, in later years became a governor general there. But the case was taken to our highest court, the Privy Council in London. And
okay,
the court upheld the lower courts and thought that the government had the right to reduce, if it was absolutely necessary, as they claim it was, the salary of
okay,
public servants by 8%. And I think
okay,
they added, if indeed what they're hearing and reading, that there's so much public disquiet about it, well, then the government may be replaced and defeated at the next election, and indeed that happened. But that case got a lot of public attention, and I would say that in that regard, it was perhaps my best known case, known to the public, and the most prominent of the cases.
Okay.
Well, good afternoon, Sir Richard Sheltonham. How you doing today? I'm finally am here. Had some technical difficulties, but I finally made it. And I know Miss Keisha has been doing a great job, and I just want to welcome you to the show. And I appreciate you taking time out from your busy schedule to be a part of the show. So,
well, delighted to be here, and thanks very much for inviting me.
yes, it's an honor. It's truly an honor to be in the presence of you today and to be able to talk to you and to learn about your career and what you're doing now. So Miss Reefer, continue on.
Okay. Which aspect in law is your favorite one?
I came up as a generalist, working across a wide area,
Okay.
but I would say that I took a lot of delight in doing criminal law. I enjoyed it, and did in my time a little over 100 murder cases. I did about 85, 90 of those cases as defense counsel, but I had to prosecute some heinous murder cases in St. Kitts for the government of St. Kitts. They were known as Canefield murders. The government went out of sugar, but did not cut down the sugar canes that remained in the fields. And a lot of heinous murders were committed, and they were buried in the cane fields. They used the cane fields as a burial ground, but the burial grounds were not 6 feet down. They were 2 feet, 18 inches. So that after the bodies began to smell, the dogs would be attracted, scratch the earth, and find the bodies. So many of the bodies buried very shallowly were discovered by the dogs, and the police then were called in for exposed dead bodies, and then led to arrests. So they were called the Canefield murder cases, and the director of public prosecutions in St. Kitts at that time called me in to assist in leading for the prosecution, so that I was involved in many heinous murder cases in St. Kitts, and in the end did 100 or so cases in the field of criminal law, both working as defense counsel and as prosecutor. So that, along those cases, along with the ones that I did for the one I did for Ophelia King, perhaps are my best known cases. But I had a great interest in personal injury too, and had a very large practice in personal injuries resulting from accidents at the workplace, accidents on the road. They involve death claims because sometimes the victims die on the road, so you get death claims. Sometimes the organs are badly damaged, their limbs. So I've done a lot of personal injury work, and one time between myself and my brother might have had over 50% of the claims in Barbados, personal injury claims. So my chambers still has a large name in that area, and I continue to attract clientele in the field of personal injury.
Do you remember any prominent lawyers in Barbados or the other Caribbean countries from your foundational days practicing law?
Well, I was fortunate to have worked with two very prominent ones as my chamber masters. Sir Jack Deere was one of my chamber masters. Also, Harold Bernard St. John, who became Sir Harold and was the politician who succeeded Tom Adams the year after he died as Prime Minister of Barbados. Jack was the leader writer for the Barbados Advocate, which was the only daily paper for many years. Um, and he was very knowledgeable, writing the editorials for 10 years or thereabout. And there was a tradition in those times which Jack insisted on that we ought not to go out for lunch, but they had a maid cook and she would prepare lunch and he would call in prominent people well known in particular areas to come from time to time and have lunch with us. So we were not only able to talk law, and if I'm having any need for guidance in any particular case, to ask for their guidance, but I was able to participate in the discussion with specialists in many areas who were invited to have lunch with us from time to time. So I couldn't have had a better upbringing in terms of those to whom I was exposed. But there was also a gentleman in Barbados who died a few years ago, Guyanese, called Sir Fenton Ramsahoy. He started a law school in Trinidad and was a prominent lawyer across the region. And I developed a good relationship with him, and he assisted me and led me in a few cases too, including the 8% case to the Privy Council in London. And when he died, the Privy Council in London had a special session which was televised, and many people around the Caribbean were able to uh, zero in, as it were, on what was going on, and they paid special tribute to Sir Fenton Ramsahoy for his outstanding work. I think he took over 200 cases to the Privy Council in London. So I was fortunate.
Yes, very fortunate. Sir Shellingham, can you remember one of the outstanding legal professors or mentors at the start of your career?
Well, at law school, there were some good men, but at the start of the career, I would mention the same. I was out of school by then, so I am attracted to and guided by practitioners. And I would mention the same Sir Jack Dare. He took the first case to the Privy Council out of Barbados, not forget what's the name of the case now. Brees and John had a regional practice. He practiced in some of the islands of the Eastern Caribbean. So I would say that my practice in the early years, where I had the guidance of Sir Harold St. John, Sir Jack Dare, Sir Fenton Ramsahoy, that they were the outstanding people in law who guided me and helped to shape my development.
Yes, thank you. Okay, would you consider mentoring a young attorney besides as a legal partner or chambers associate for a short, long term, or a period? I believe even a few days or a week or something like that of mentorship can boost an upcoming attorney's perspective or even a brief talk as guidance.
Well, I was properly mentored, if I may put it there. Um, and I mentioned again Sir Jack there, Sir Harold Bernard St. John, Dr. Ramsahoy, um, later knighted himself, Sir Fenton. And for many years now, perhaps going back 40 years or so, because I'm now doing 52 years this year, I have always had every summer a student or two in my chambers. In fact, one of my juniors now who is here with me, Mrs. Shelley C. Sharan, but she goes by her maiden name, Shelley C. Sharan. That's her maiden name. She practices by her. She was one of my students that came and never left. And
Okay.
has now been with me for 14 years or thereabout.
Wow.
So
Okay.
mentoring has been part of my continuing practice, and it has been so for over 40 years.
Okay. That's great. Okay. Is there anything you would like to see improve in the legal structure, at least in Barbados, or perhaps the rest of the Caribbean region?
Well, we have both a fortunate and unfortunate situation here now. For many years, there was no law school in the Caribbean. Now there is one in Jamaica, one in Trinidad, and one in Guyana.
Okay.
The result is that when I came to the bar, 1970 or thereabout, you had no more than 6 or 8 people a year who might be coming into the profession. And we were all fortunate that we were able to get placements in chambers, well-established chambers. And so we benefited from mentoring.
Okay.
Many who graduate, and sometimes there's 60 people graduating a year now. Look at the contrast from 6 or 8 to now 60. Many of them are not fortunate in getting placements in any established chambers. In fact, many of them practice law, and we have all sorts of stories as to what constitute the chambers. I'm told that some of them convert their vehicle into chambers. So you have the driver or the driver's seat, and then there is a, a desk and 3 or 4 chairs in the back. And that is what constitutes the chambers. Some of them go to established eating houses and see 2 or 3 people over 2 hours or so. The workers there will see a person come in, he may even be well dressed, and someone is with him, they offer a drink, and that person is there in their papers, and they're going through together and so on, and then that person leaves and another one comes. So for 2, 3 hours, they go to eating places, corner an area, and 2, 3 people come and see them. They're the sorts of conditions that are unfortunate because you need guidance in your early days in the profession. You need it in medicine, you need it in law, you need it in every profession. When you come out of medical school, law school, there is only so much that you know. And you need proper guidance, particularly in the early years, before you can stand with confidence on your own feet. And even then, it is good to have access to your seniors to discuss any matter with them and even seek further guidance.
Yes.
So
Thank
that is
you.
a situation now that I've just described that is unfortunate. I don't know what is the answer to it, but we are having more people come to the profession every year than can get access to proper chambers to guide them and help them develop in their early years.
Okay. Thank you very much. That was so enlightening, so informative. Okay, what advice would you give to young lawyers coming up in the profession in Barbados? And of course, should I say the entire Caribbean region?
Well, this is an area, law is an area like medicine, I suppose, in which you can never stop learning. And I've already commented on the unfortunate situation that now exists, that many people start out without having access to and relationship with experienced lawyers. My advice would be for them to continue their reading, study. I have had a lot of books as I was growing up in the profession and still do about outstanding cases. and see the techniques recorded as to what techniques were employed by the lawyers in different situations and with what success. Sometimes the cross-examination of lawyers is reflected in these big cases in several pages, and you will see the techniques employed, which you may think you could study and imitate to your advantage. A case that was well known in the States and that I followed in great detail was the case that was done by Johnny Cochran and involving O.J. Simpson. And it turned out later on that I met Johnny Cochran in very interesting circumstances. We don't have his photograph here, elsewhere a few yards away, but he did some work in Antigua for the Antigua government. And when he was there, I was doing some work around. He said that he heard that the Johnny Cochran of the Caribbean was here in Antigua, and he made arrangements for us to meet. We had dinner then, that very week that we were in Antigua together. And we had a correspondence after that. And after he died, his wife sent me a lovely photograph of himself and saying that he spoke frequently of the great delight that he's had in meeting the Johnny Cochran of the Caribbean. And I still have that photograph in my chambers on the desk nearby. So I would advise them to follow as best they can. And many of those sensational cases, both in England and in the United States, lead to books. You normally have a book following an outstanding case like that. And you see many of the techniques that are employed by the lawyers, some of which in the right circumstances can also be employed with great effect in any case that they may have. So also in their idle time, when they're not busy and their big cases on, spend some time in the courtroom, paying close attention, see how experienced counsel are operating, what sort of objections there may be to their line of argument by the prosecution, and how the judge may intervene from time to time. All of those things you need to follow clearly and continue to read in the law, not necessarily about legal principles, but about the law in action, how counsel for the prosecution and for the defense behave and how they submit in relation to the circumstances of the case. There's a lot to be learned from that, and I would encourage them to maintain their interest in the law. Don't only get a law degree and stop there. Continue to read in the law, and whenever there's an opportunity to see the law in action, as it were, get into the courtroom and see how the drama unfolds.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. In celebration of Barbados as a new republic, can you give a brief overview of how the practice of law pre-independence and after independence and hope for the future for a new republic?
Well, it is perhaps too early to comment on this. The law remains the same as it was pre the republic status, which is only last year. But the government has appointed commissions. One is looking at law review in the context of our new status as a republic. And they also set up a commission, an advisory commission, looking at parliamentary reform. An old colleague who ended up as a judge called Sir Christopher Blackman is he ended up as the Chief Justice of Belize, I think that's correct. Yes, he was Chief Justice of Belize. He is now, and he was a High Court judge here, he is heading the Law Reform Commission. And I have been given the responsibility of heading the Advisory Commission on Parliamentary Reform. So I'm not expecting things to change too radically. I don't think that land law will be different because we're a republic, or the law of tort or our labor law principles or anything of the sort. But there may be some changes that are necessary, consistent with our new status. And we are looking at that in terms of Parliament, but we are still in the very early days
Okay.
of the work of the Commission, that is.
Okay.
And in our Republican status too, because we are less than 2 years.
Okay. Thank you. It would be remiss of me to focus on your legal journey and not the prowess of how this impacted your political success. Could you briefly
Well,
speak?
the two ran side by side, as it were. I had an early interest in politics, and within a year of my coming back to Barbados from my studies in 1970, December, and by 1971, October, I was at the polls as a candidate for the Barbados Labour Party in a constituency called Christchurch East, which consisted in part of St. Patrick's and Silver Sands and Thornbury Hill and Pilgrim Road, Charnock's. I believe some of these areas are well known to you growing up as you did in South District, and not too far away. And I, in later years after serving, was defeated in my first run, was successful in my second and third runs. Then I was defeated and moved to St. Joseph and
Okay.
spent 14 years there before I returned. So I had 23 years in the House of Assembly, which would be comparable to the House of Representatives. And then I had 2 years as President of the Senate. So I
Okay.
have had 25 years of parliamentary experience. And I should mention that at one point, I was the Barbados representative in a parliament called the ACP EU. African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries and European Union countries have a parliament called ACP/EU. And I was the Barbados representative in that parliament for 9 years. So that I have about 30 years, 35 years of parliamentary experience on
Okay.
which I can draw.
Okay. Well, we don't have much time left, so let me ask you at least one more question. I know as a man in the profession of law, do you have any words of encouragement for progressive or aspiring female attorneys, considering they have made an outstanding mark within this career?
Well, I meet a lot of young people who are not members of any groups. And so they graduate, but nobody in their community know of them. There's been a lot of migration across Barbados, and there are a lot of new communities. When I grew up, I was a member of a settled community, so that I knew all the people. By the time I was 20, most of them knew me and members of my family. But a lot of these young people, a lot of migration in the country, moved to new areas, for example, in St. Philip, from places that they used to live before. And nobody knows them. I was known through the community. I was active too in the establishment of young groups. I was active in debating. I was known in a certain generation as a champion debater. All of that was part. I was active in the church. So the church community knew me. Young people in the community, old people knew my parents and their relations. But it was a settled community. So too many of our young people are not active in groups, and they come to the profession not even being known by their neighbors. And that is unfortunate, because in the end, you rely on people to support you in your practice and to give you work. Then a
Okay.
lot of them, after they graduate, they're encouraged to join women's organizations, like Rotarians. The women have a group themselves and other organizations, but too many of them are not well connected to the community. And I think that it has turned out to be a major weakness for many of them, such that unless they can get into well-established practices that command their own clientele because of their long-standing reputation, they may see that they are not getting the start that some others like myself have been fortunate in having at the outset of my career.
Okay. Yes. Okay, this one here. Can you give a synopsis of the correlation of legal brilliance and political wit? How these professions complement each other?
Legal, I didn't hear that, Bell.
Okay, can you give a synopsis of the correlation of legal brilliance and political wit? How these professions complement each other? It is evident that the two of these elements significantly contributed to years of political success in Barbados, serving among some of Barbados's best ministerial gems. So,
Well, both the lawyer and the politician have something in common. What is required of each one is an ability to communicate easily, confidently, and persuasively. That is needed in the court of law. It is needed on the political platform. So it is the same sort of equipment that you need to be successful. I have scarcely heard of successful politicians who did not possess the gift of the gab. Equally, I can think of no successful advocate. It's not the only form of lawyering, but I can think of no successful advocate who could not speak confidently, well, and persuasively. So that they have that in common. And sometimes it is necessary to heckle a heckler, to silence a heckler by responding sharply to his heckling comment. Equally, a mischievous judge, and some of them are mischievous too, may want to, well dressed in his scarlet robes and so on, he may wish to stop you, if only to test you. Your confidence, your retort, your ability to snap back. Counsel, what about so and so and so and so? And if you become intimidated and did not have a sharp retort, he may be persuaded even to continue. But if you shut him up quickly and sharply, though respectfully enough, he may say, boy, I have to be careful with that young man. He has powerful weapons there in his mouth. So that ability, quick retort, articulate, persuasive, fearless, all of those qualities are needed both in the legal profession if you're to be an advocate and also if you're to be a successful politician.
okay.
Okay.
It's not surprising then that you see many politicians, many lawyers, advocates in particular, end up on the political platform and in political parties.
Okay.
Okay, Sir Richard Shetterham, we have spent some time with you this afternoon, and it has been a pleasure being in presence of such a great and brilliant lawyer and politician from Barbados. And hopefully one day I might get down that way to just shake your hand and to sit down and talk to you in person to learn more about you.
I look forward.
Yes,
We're not
yes.
too far away. If you got to Miami, you may find that we are only about 3.5 hours away.
Oh, okay. That's
So
not
don't
a bad trip. That's not a bad trip.
No. You will enjoy it. And if you give me a little notice, I may add to the enjoyment of your stay.
Thank you. Thank you. And I want to thank my co-host, Ms. Keisha Reefer, for stepping in for me today while I was having a little some technical difficulties getting on. And also, I want to thank the viewers for viewing this show tonight. Urban Sentinel Live is a part of the Urban Sentinel Live magazine and also part of Kearney Media. And I really appreciate you taking your time out to watch this show tonight. And I hope that you picked up something and learned something tonight from this brilliant individual who's a great asset to the Caribbean islands as a lawyer. And we always need good lawyers. Regardless of what part of the world you're in, you always need a good lawyer. So, to my folks, thanks again for watching the show. Take care of yourselves. Be safe out there. You know, stay prayed up. Whatever you got to do, continue on doing what you're doing. And take some of these nuggets, pass them on to the young people, and encourage our young people to go out and make greatness in this world today. Again, I want to thank Keisha Reefer and Sir Richard Shetterham for being part of the Urban Sentinel live show tonight. Look forward to seeing you next week, everyone. Take care and be good to yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.